Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, this South Carolina program, Shane Beamer, it's one of the more fascinating programs that you see in the country heading into 2024, where I think there's a lot of national media analysts looking at this South Carolina team. Obviously, a disappointing season in 2023, and then see, all right, Spencer Rattler, one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, moving on to the NFL draft. Xavier Legette, another really talented player, moving on, and say, all right, this team wasn't great in 2023, loses a lot of key contributors from the 2023 season. I think a lot of people, kind of just write this South Carolina program off heading into 2024. And you kind of dive into this roster and say, there's so much young talent that's waiting to kind of break out in the 2024 year. And although on the surface, you lose some really good football players to the NFL, there's a lot of reason to believe that this South Carolina team gets better heading into 2024. Now, we've talked extensively about the improved offensive line, the juice that Lenore Sellers had, the talented wide receivers that they brought in through the transfer portal. Want to focus on the defensive side of the football and talk about a unit that there were certain aspects of the South Carolina defense that I thought were really impressive in 2023 on the film, specifically the inside of the defensive line, but they also had massive problems within the South Carolina defense. Want to dive into why we think South Carolina can take a step on the defensive side of the football heading into 2024. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And over this offseason, the amount of support y'all have shown the boys, the South Carolina fans especially, we can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, and I kind of would love to hear how you guys are feeling about this South Carolina defense heading into 2024 as well. And Dill, without further ado, I think there is one glaring hole that we saw in South Carolina's defense in 2023 that I think gets significantly better heading into 2024, and that's the pass rush, and I think specifically the pass rush from that edge rusher position. Now, the pass rush in general last year just wasn't good enough, right? 4.4% sack rate. That was 117th in the country. Sacking the quarterback one of the least amount of times, not only in the SEC, but the Power 5 conferences. They'll heading into 2024, I think the biggest storyline is the improvement at the edge rusher spot that we're going to see in this 2024 year.
Yeah, and that's the big spot. I thought you did have a decent amount of disruption from the middle, but when you don't have any edge guys who are making plays and being consistently dominant, which they certainly didn't have, it's really, really hard to put those sack numbers up and again, make those disruptive plays that allow you to play really good defense. And I think you look, Kyle Kennard, I think is one of the sneaky, underrated transfer portal additions. I thought at Georgia Tech he was really good. And one thing you love about Kyle Kennard is he's really complete. He can rush the passer. He's physical along the line of scrimmage in the run game, so he can play a fair amount. And then obviously you got to look to Dylan Stewart. I mean, just seeing him in that spring game, he very much looks the part. I think he's going to be very much an instant contributor. So I think those two guys especially come in and bring a lot more firepower than what they had last year.
Yeah, we just dove into the film of Dylan Stewart a couple of days ago. I mean, this is a kid. It's rare to find true freshmen that are ready to contribute along the line of scrimmage, especially in the SEC. Dylan Stewart's one of those guys. I think there's a very good chance that Dylan Stewart leads this team in sacks in the 2024 year.
It was so hard to pick him and Kyle Kennard out in that game. I thought I was like watching one, watching the other. I couldn't tell who was who. And then that's what kind of clicked to me. It's like, oh, Dylan Stewart kind of looks like what Kyle Kennard's doing, and Kyle Kennard's great. So I think that's the big thing you look, because last year you really didn't have anyone consistently, and you really didn't have any depth either. So I think you had a problem with top-end talent. You had a problem with lack of depth. I think this year, again, even a guy like Umazolu, if he can kind of take that step, a guy who's an interesting talent for sure, I think you need more depth and you need that top-end talent, which they have. I think it'll be about those other guys taking steps and kind of filling it out.
You noted something really important, like you struggling to kind of find the difference between Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart. I think the biggest difference is one was an early enrollee true freshman, one's a redshirt senior, but it just kind of tells you that Dylan Stewart looks the part of an SEC football player along the line of scrimmage. Dill, I would shout at a guy like Gilbert Edmond, too, who I know went to Florida State, didn't have a great year in 2023. You go back to the 2022 season, played very good football for South Carolina. And so not only do you add like two veteran Kyle Kennard and Gilbert Edmond that I think massively upgrade the unit that we saw in 2023, I think more importantly, you have a ton of young talent. I would throw Brian Thomas Jr. You saw some flashes from him in year two. Desmond Yu, Dylan Stewart. not only do you have that top end veteran talent, but you also have some young cats that I think can be difference makers coming off the edge. And why that's so important is, Dill, you go back to last year, obviously the sack numbers were bad. All the pass rush production came from the inside. You're returning all those guys and probably get better with DeAndre Jules. I mean, you look at Tonka Hemingway, led this team with 19 quarterback hurries. TJ Sanders, a guy that's getting thrown around in first-round NFL mock drafts, was second on the team in quarterback hurries, led this team in sacks. Obviously, Alex Huntley can play. You bring in DeAndre Jules. It is a deep interior defensive line. They're going to be pushing pockets. If you can get better production from that edge rusher position, which we certainly think they did, whether it's young talent or guys from the transfer portal, I think this pass rush gets significantly better in the 2024 season. Now, the number 2 reason the boys are believers in this South Carolina defense, Dillis linebacker play. And you all know I don't like to drag football players. Stone Blanton was not an SEC linebacker last year, not a SEC caliber linebacker. I guess he played in the SEC for South Carolina. Probably shouldn't have been playing as much. I mean, Stone Blanton won from an athleticism standpoint. The game of college football is just too different now. I mean,
that's what I was going to get into. I thought you saw them struggle so much in space. Like, I'm honestly going back and watching the Florida game, watching the Missouri game, how many plays that there'd be in 3rd and long and they'd give up a quarterback scramble or give up a screen play for 10 plus yards. I mean, that stuff's inexcusable. That's just like, do you have linebackers who are comfortable out in space making plays? And I think Debo Williams is still kind of building that into his game. I thought he really specialized playing in the box, making plays there. But that's why I think the addition of Demetrius Knight is huge, because when you watch him play at Charlotte, I thought a guy who looked really comfortable, even like took some reps in the slot at times, just a guy who I think gives a really nice compliment to what they have in Debo Williams. And they just didn't have that last year because it didn't feel like anyone could play.
Yeah, Debo Williams is the guy. He's the leader of this defense. He knows the defense. You're looking for a better linebacker too. You make no mistake about it. Like, Stone Blanton just wasn't good enough, and you would try to work in a guy like Pup Howard, who you could tell a physically gifted kid, but just wasn't ready between the years to play college football yet. Didn't really know what he was doing. Dill, you kind of mentioned Demetrius Knight Jr. I know a guy that you've been kind of banging the table for a while. Kind of in prep of this episode, I went back and watched the last couple of games of the season when Bam Martin-Scott kind of got asserted into this defense. You talk about hyper athleticism. Like, Bam Martin-Scott's that guy. Now, he put on some weight. He's up to 241 pounds heading into 2024, which I think is massive, because I think the one knock on him was he's playing a little undersized last year.
He looked like a DB at times playing. He kind of more looked like a nickelback. And again, you kind of think if he can put that size on and be able to be more comfortable in the box when his number is called in that realm, I think, again, a guy who you kind of talk about why some of the issues were happening in that linebacker room, just lack of productivity in space. I mean, Bam Martin-Scott, if he can get it rolling, he's really, really looks comfortable in space and coverage, long, athletic, kind of what you want your modern-day linebackers.
And with a sneaky good defensive line, again, a defensive line that I don't think enough people are talking about that I think could be the strength of the South Carolina defense. If you have good linebacker play, like, that's the combination. Like, your defensive line winning at the point of attack, keeping your linebackers clean, that's a really good recipe for South Carolina. Now, the number 3 reason the boys are buying stock in South Carolina's defense, the secondary just getting a year older, where the South Carolina hype in the secondary, I'm certainly guilty of it 12 months ago. We were all so fired up about this secondary heading into 2023, and we kind of forgot to realize, like, a lot of these guys in the secondary are still extremely young football players, right? You look at Nick, you look at DQ Smith, guys that were phenomenal their freshman year, maybe left a little bit on the table in 2023. I think the reason to be optimistic about this South Carolina secondary heading into 2024 is they just get a year older. And in that secondary position, specifically the safety position, having those instincts and those experience and knowing what you're looking at, knowing how to read concepts and watching quarterback's eyes, that's all really important. I think you're going to see a big bounce back year between guys like Nick Emenari and DQ Smith, because you're talking about some of the more talented safeties in the SEC. Now, if they just continue to get better-ass football players, it's a reason to believe the secondary kind of gets back to what we expected it to be in the 2023 year.
Yeah, and I think that's combo. To me, DQ Smith's the guy I'm kind of looking at. I thought Emaneri had a great year. I
He's
think
so
he's
good.
very much primed to be one of the better players in the back end in all the SEC, if not the country. DQ Smith's the guy I think left a little bit on the table last year. Feels like he could have more of an imprint on the game. Jalen Kilgore, obviously, really impressive young guy. So I think, again, last year you were just playing awfully young in the middle. And I think some of that reared its head. And they did give up way too high of a completion percentage towards the bottom half of the obviously college football. So you clean that up. I think, again, they have good, solid cornerbacks. I think O'Donnell Fortune's going to be really good for them. But I also think at the end of the day, when you can't rush the passer, it's kind of hard to play good defense in the secondary. So that, to me, I'm looking, can they be a little bit more complimentary? Because they do go heavy to the zone. And when you play a lot of zone coverage, if you have too much time, it's kind of hard to, at the end of the day, deal with that. So to me, I'm
I think
looking, can they play more complimentary ball?
that's a really, really good point. Like, I think a lot of people are going to look at the secondary numbers, right? Completion percentage, passing yards, and say, oh, this South Carolina defense took a step back. Specifically in the secondary, I think it's really important to note that, again, you can have as good of a secondary as you want, but if your pass rush can't get home, the secondary can only do so much in the back end. And so if you get a better pass rush, the secondary numbers, I'm fully confident, are going to be good. Now I want to circle back to Jalen Kilgore. Again, kind of doing some prep to dive into the South Carolina defense. He's special. I mean, I don't know how South Carolina keeps doing it, but they keep finding these kids who just kind of fly under the radar on the recruiting trail, come to South Carolina, are elite caliber players. Jalen Kilgore is one of those guys. They'll only miss 7% of his tackles as a true freshman at that nickelback role. That's one of the lower numbers that you'll see in the entire country, much less for a true freshman. The kid does it all at that nickel corner spot, and that is a very important position in this modern era of college football defenses, where you have to be able to hold up in coverage. But if you're going to play that nickel role, you have to be able to come up and tackle in space. And Jalen Kilgore did that as a true freshman, which is rare. The last piece of the recipe for South Carolina, just kind of looking at some numbers, and I think a better pass rush, once again, I think it all starts with this pass rush, is going to help you. Better on money down, specifically third downs. They were 110th in third down conversion rate last year on defense. You talk about having a good defense, you can win first and second down all you want, but if you can't get off the field on third down, it's going to be a problem. You're not going to have a good defense. And I think, again, when you're in those third and long situations and you don't have a pass rush, it's hard to get off the field. I think if this pass rush gets better and South Carolina gets better on third down, you're going to see substantial, I'll go with that word, substantial improvements on the defensive side of the football in terms of yards per play, points per game. If they can get better on third downs, that's another massive storyline for this South Carolina defense.
And I think another thing to not overlook is the ability to rush forward more consistently, where
Agreed.
a lot of times last year they did have to send linebackers and they had to send safeties, and you thought that, or felt like that was pretty consistent. And again, that opens up opportunities for obviously hitting some of those plays underneath when you just got to make or force guys into tough spots. And when you don't have great athletic linebackers, which it certainly didn't feel like they had every game last year, that's a good opportunity for teams to exploit that. So I think, again, everything kind of to me starts with this edge group taking a monster step. I think a lot of their problems emanated from that. I think obviously some of the additions in that linebacker room are going to be huge because that was a brutal spot. And I think the secondary to me will just kind of stay the course. I honestly didn't think that unit was nearly as bad as their numbers showed when I go watch those games. It just, again, there were other elements of that team not really clicking, linebacker and edge specifically. So I think that unit should be really good. If they just clean up or if they get top end play from Kyle Kennard, Gilbert Edmond, and Dylan Stewart, I think they'll just be fine.
Yeah, and you make no mistake about it, at least in my opinion, the most important statistic and element of a good defense. And it's kind of proven, right? You go back to Michigan last, you go back to Georgia the last couple of years. What do all those elite defenses have in common? Like, they can get after the passer. If you can't affect the passer, it's going to be really hard to play good defense. If South Carolina can take that step, we're going to see this South Carolina defense, I think, play a lot better football in 2024. Dill, it's a sneaky team. I feel like a lot of people are kind of writing this off.
They seem like they're ready to kick Beamer to the curb, a lot of the national media, at least. Like, oh, who's South Carolina getting next year? I mean, I feel like Beamer's got this in a much better spot than people think. Last year, just there were some glaring weaknesses. I mean, again, you talk about some of those issues we just discussed on defense, offensive line play as bad as I've seen at the SEC level outside of maybe Vanderbilt and forever. I mean, those two get corrected. This team's not that far up.
Agreed. And we all know, like, it's hard to win in the SEC if you have bad offensive line, can't get after the passer. So if they get better here, watch out for South Carolina. I think one other, I know we're supposed to be talking defense here, but like Lenora Sellers, we're not really sure what we're going to get yet, but it's going to be exciting. And there's some serious upside to Lenora Sellers' game. Really excited about this team, Dale. We'll continue. Probably could do a deep dive on Lenora Sellers before this season rolls around. To the South Carolina fans, appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.